Welcome to Roosevelt Live. This segment of the show, we're going to discuss something happened in New York recently, and I know I probably bring a lot of New York stories up, but New York and California and Florida, it seems like all the bizarre behavior go on at a lot of times. Not totally, but a lot of times. But in this case, a cab driver in New York, for some reason, a little 7-year-old kid that actually he was mentally challenged in some ways as well, but even if he wasn't, he was only 7 years old. And the cab driver, the person, I don't know who the person, I don't know what the relationship was between the person and the 7-year-old, but they put the 7-year-old in the cab. And the cab driver, for some reason, didn't inquire about payment from whomever the adult was that put the kid in the cab, got a certain distance away, and realized the kid didn't have any money, and the cab driver actually put the 7-year-old out on the street. Now, that's one of the craziest things I think I've ever heard in my lifetime, because first of all, there's so many problems with this situation that it could go on for days. The cab driver, it should be, first of all, I don't think 7-year-olds should be allowed to ride in a cab unaccompanied by an adult. Have to be accompanied by an adult. That's ridiculous. Someone of a certain age, who would put their 7-year-old child, whether that child was mentally challenged or whether that child was nothing wrong with him but other than being 7 years old. You don't put a 7-year-old in a cab to ride from one destination to another with no other adult in there but the cab driver. That in itself is stupidity. In my opinion, the person that put the kid in the cab doesn't, to me, lacks some common sense. The person that was going to be receiving the kid on the other end, same there. Because unless they didn't know the child was going to be riding in a cab by himself. The mother, allegedly, when she talked to the police department or whatever, she said that the cab company was familiar with them and she knew them by name, etc., etc. Well, it's still irrelevant. Well, that's true or not, it doesn't matter. And that one cab driver apparently didn't know anything, because that one cab driver, which, again, in my opinion, should be prosecuted if there is a law that you put a 7-year-old out on a street corner. According to the report, that's what happened. I don't know how the kid managed to get to or back or from or whatever happened after that, but that's what the story was, that the cab driver put the kid out on the street corner and because he didn't have any cab fare. But the mother should have known better than to put or to have her kid put in a cab where there was no funding. The person that was putting the child in the cab should have taken care of the funding beforehand, or gave that kid money to take care of the problem. Or I personally, myself, I'm going to speak from my own point of view, I would have never put a 7-year-old in the cab in the first place. I don't care what the issue was, wouldn't have put him in there unless it was a matter of life and death. That's a different story, but I don't see that being the case. So I would have never put a child in a cab to ride from one side of town to another with a stranger, not knowing what that cab driver or whomever may have gotten in that cab, or did that kid get the wrong address, or maybe that cab was stopped at the wrong address, or that kid, I don't know, anything could go wrong basically. And I just don't see why the mother thought that it was okay as long as she had some type of, she said, understanding with the cab company. There is no understanding when a 7-year-old is being put out to ride from one neighborhood to another. I don't know what the distance was between where the cab driver picked up the kid at and where the cab driver allegedly was going to drop the kid off at. I don't know. I just know that the mother is irresponsible. If she was the one that put him in the cab, or if someone else put him in there. Either way, irresponsible. Cab driver, irresponsible. Putting the child out on the street to try to find his or her way, or in this case, his way, to a safe haven. The cab company needs to talk to that cab driver. I want to do that cab driver have children, because even if he doesn't, he should have common sense. But if he did, I couldn't imagine me putting a kid out on the street. It would never happen. I would have either A, turned around and went back to the original address, or I would have called it in to the people I work for and found out what they want me to do about this, because obviously something would have to be done. I know the fare has to get paid, but he didn't do any good toward anybody by putting the child out on the street. So the cab company was at fault. The cab driver is at fault. But see, the biggest person, a lot of people blame the cab driver. I heard the story repeatedly, and it was bashing the cab driver. And I'm not letting the cab driver off the hook. But I think the mother is to me holds most of the responsibility, because you just don't put a kid. I didn't even know it was legal to put a kid in a cab at that age and send them off to an address with no adult there. So what, a 7-year-old is going to get out of a cab and then go and unlock their own door perhaps, or knock on the door and hope somebody's at home? I don't know. The whole story just, it stinks. And it's a sad day when people are not responsible for their children. And especially if a kid has some type of disability where they don't, I understood the kid couldn't talk very well, or that's even worse. I mean, even if he could, how much understanding can you get out of a 7-year-old? How much can a 7-year-old legitimately tell you to, I mean, yeah, there are some smart kids out there. I'm not taking away anything from kids, and there are some really smart children, but I still think 7 is way too young to be put in a cab and driven to another destination. And I think somebody should get some parenting classes. I don't think the cab driver should be fired. I just think that he was insensitive when it came to making the right choice. I think he made a terrible choice. And I'm sure with all the media hype that was around it, that if he ever had to do it again, he would use common sense and either call it in to his supervisors or take the child back to the destination where he was picked up at. Maybe he shouldn't even picked up the child in the first place. Maybe he should have questioned the person that put the child in the cab. What about the fare? That's what you do. But you don't put a child out on the streets and say, well, you know what? He didn't have any money. So what? Money ain't everything. You run the risk of a child being abducted by somebody else, taken away and never seen again. Who would be at fault then? I think the cab driver would definitely be negligent. You can't blame the cab company. I mean, I guess you could, but sometimes, obviously, some of these cab drivers are independent drivers. So I don't know what the responsibility would be for the cab company if it's an independent driver, owns his own cab. So I don't know how New York rules are, but I know if I'm not a cab driver, but if I was, I definitely wouldn't put a kid out in the street. There would be no way, no how, no sir. I would have questioned the person that put the child in the cab from the get-go. And if I wasn't intelligent enough to do that, I definitely wasn't going to put him out. So at some point I would have had to make a decision, either pay it myself, call it in, or take him back. And that's the end of the story. But I think in the future, New York shouldn't even allow 7-year-olds to ride in a cab by themselves anyway. I know we're not in New York. I know this is Florida. But this show here, it airs in different areas outside the state of Florida. And again, this show is about opinions. So I'm just voicing my opinion, how I feel about it. Everybody might feel different than me. It doesn't really matter if they feel different than me or not, because it's just about opinions. It doesn't make me right or wrong. It's just an opinion. And I think most people with children, and even people without children, would not put a 7-year-old in a cab to ride from one destination to another. I mean, it just smacks of common sense. And I know as a free society, we can't give people tests before they have children. But sometime in a tongue-in-cheek way, I wish they could. Because there's some very stupid people out here. They're extremely unintelligent. I mean, I don't know what other way to put it. I see people doing the dumbest things. I see people walking down Bush Boulevard here in Tampa with it look like a 2 or 3-year-old, and they're walking down the sidewalk, and the kid is on the side where the traffic is. They're not even holding the kid's hand. I see people at the bus stop. Children are playing at the bus stop anytime they can dart out there in the street. The mother is sitting there on the cell phone. Or she's walking 15 paces in front of the kid. The kid got little feet. They can't really keep up. And then every now and then they jogging to try to keep up with mom or dad. I saw that at the flea market several months back. Little kid was a good 20 feet behind their parents. Both parents. Unbelievable. Do they not know that children are being abducted every day? That anything can happen in the blink of an eye? It doesn't take but a second for something to happen to your kids. So to keep your eyes on them at all times. And I was always been a cautious parent. But there were times when I looked up and my son that used to be a little kid years ago, I looked up and I didn't see him. And I literally almost had a heart attack. Because just the thought of for 1 minute not knowing where my child was overbearing for me. So people that, do things to kids, or we can't find the children, they're not paying attention to them, and they're just irresponsible.